Hello everyone. This is going to be building an MCP server in Rust. Now, MCP servers have had a lot of bad press. I don't really want to comment on that. Personally, I find them useful, and I also find them a good way to learn new concepts in Rust. So if all else fails, do this and you will learn some new stuff, which what's not to like. So building your first MCP server. Now I've built quite a few now. I started off doing the ones that used stdio as the transport method. Then there was SSE, server sent events, and that was quickly superseded by HTTP streamable. That's what we're going to build here. So the focus will be on building the tools and serving tools with a handler and building the handler as well. Now, this is all made possible. So, if you've ever seen the Jeremy Chone video where he built it all from scratch with the RPC JSON, this is actually using the official Model Context Protocol Rust SDK. As of the start of January 2026, it's got 2.8 thousand stars on GitHub. The latest, which came out 2 weeks ago, is version 0.12.0. Now, about 6 or 8 months ago, it was only on version 0.2, 0.3. It's progressed quite quickly. So, given what I've just said, I want to show you how I have, within the past week or so. So, this is 2026. Forget everything you've done in 2025. I'll show you my article where you can just skip ahead if you want. The purpose of these videos is not fast-paced tutorial. There's others out there that do that much better than I will. This is hopefully a look at me trying stuff, getting stuck, asking questions, unpicking stuff. I don't know about you, but I don't really want to watch a video where just some person pastes loads of stuff in and it works, and then that's thanks, bye. Don't forget to like and subscribe. So let's start at the top. What you'll learn. So if you follow this web page, which is on my redandgreen.co.uk site, you'll learn how to build an MCP server, Model Context Protocol. Not if in about a year ago, if you Googled that, it said something about Minecraft. It's not Minecraft, honestly. It's a standard that allows AI assistants to interact with external tools and data sources. So that's a bit back to front, really, because it says external tools, but actually, what I would say is the best use of MCP is if you're in a company and it's all on-prem, then effectively it's an internal tool. But it's internal to you, but it's external to Claude or the AI LLM provider. So that's why they call it external. If you're of the mindset where you work in a company and you want everything to be on-prem, self-hosted, internal, then what you're actually building is an internal tool. So that's two sides of the same coin there. No, as it rightfully says, it's a universal adapter that lets Claude or other AI models use it. So ChatGPT, OpenAI, Llama. Don't forget, you can use tools with Llama. It depends on what model you're using with Llama. So I typically would use Llama 3.2 or similar. Gemini's fine. That uses MCP now. A while back, the Gemini documentation was they didn't overly promote the compatibility with MCP, but it's fine. I use Gemini Flash 2.5 at the moment. I try not to get distracted by the latest versions of things, with one caveat. So with the LLM providers, if something new and shiny comes out today, to be honest, I don't care. I'll keep working on what I was building with 2 months ago. Otherwise, you're always starting again. The one exception to that is actually caused by LLMs. So when you're getting an LLM to help you with your code, because their training cutoff point was January 2025 quite frequently, you could end up being recommended older versions of stuff. And that's really important with rmcp, so 0.12. Last year it was on 0.29 or 0. So it's 12 now. Before it was on 2 or 3. The transport streamable HTTP server, again, that wouldn't have even existed this time last year. So now the server as well. If you use Claude will try and get you using Actix 4.0 or Axum 0.7. Don't do that. So if you're a senior dev or if you've seen someone else's code and they've got old versions, it's a bit of a code smell because you know that they've probably just copied their code from Claude or ChatGPT. And the rate of change of things. So to go back to what I said, try, especially when you've got semantic versioning, use the latest version. Now, if what I would do here, if somebody had given me this, anything that's a bit more verbose, I probably would copy and paste that in. But something like Axum, I mean, how difficult is that? Just do that, and don't. That's quicker than so you see already you've got 0.88. Just blindly copy and pasting stuff into Cargo.toml, I personally disapprove of, but that's another story. One note here: I've mainly used Actix Web, but I noticed that I started off with Axum 2 years ago, so I've got no preference really. But I noticed that in the examples tucked away somewhere, they were actually using Axum. So more for compatibility of, you see 0.8, more for compatibility of my code with rmcp, I started using Axum again. It doesn't really matter. You just need a server. The one difference with Axum is you will have to actually add the code to wait for the Control-C shutdown signal. So that's called signal, which you will. Here I just did Axum, thus it's full. But if you were trying to be a bit more precise, you would just try and include signal. Tokyo, sorry. So we're using the Tokyo signal, that's right. Okay, architecture overview. So we've got tools. So tool is something which you want your LLM to call. The beauty of using tools is that they are deterministic. Well, for the sake of this video, they're deterministic. Server handler, that handles the MCP protocol communication. The HTTP transport, Axum. So basically, number one is the tools that you write. Server handler is basically the MCP side of things, which the rmcp crate helps you with. The HTTP transport is what Axum helps you with. So 3 things. So if we just go to the code now, and feel free just to copy and paste the code that's on this. It's painful when somebody makes you watch them type the whole video, isn't it? And then you type it all in, having paused each screen on YouTube. And then you get to the last line, it doesn't even compile because one of the libraries is out of date. But so I'll just remove that one. That's just I was tweaking my NeoVim. I'll tell you what I was doing with NeoVim because it's I wouldn't say it's a game changer, but it's something I should have done a while back, but I never got around to. Okay, so this is SRC calculator. and I've started. So I've not even copied and pasted my own code from this web page yet. What I've done is I did get Claude to help with this, mainly because I was refactoring something I'd already built and I just wanted to strip out stuff I didn't need. But let's just look at the imports. So schema RS, which comes with our MCP. So all of these lines, everything is rmcp apart from Serde, which hopefully you know what Serde is all about. We're using deserialized here because we're converting a response back into Rust. So deserialize converts it back into Rust compatible, and serialize takes it from Rust to send. Here, these are the important. So we've got structs. Each of these is obviously some sort of struct, and macros. So tool handler, and tool router are macros. So if I do you see here that's a macro? Tool handler, also a macro. So because they're lowercase, they're macros. You see rock macro. And just for completeness, we'll do tool router as well. So rmcp, which we're not currently looking at, gives us these macros that do which save us writing a lot of extra code. So this is just the setup. You don't need to know all this, but it helps if you're kind of familiar with what you should be seeing. So model and then stars as prelude, error data as MCP error, server handler. We'll get to server handler later on. I think that's step. So in my article, there were 5 steps. In this video, I'm planning on covering the first 3 steps. So we've covered the server handler, the macros. Next, we've got the handler, the server, router, tool router. Go and look at that. So we've got a default, we've got a clone. We implement into iterator, tool router, new, with root, add root, merge, remove root, has root. So it's a lot of root type stuff. So there's a lot going on there. So you might think, well, MCP server, that can be very difficult. Surely that's just like a web server with some functions. There's a bit more to it than that. So I think what we'll do here, because I want to go deeper into some of these bits because it's important. In the next video, we'll actually do more of the copying and pasting stuff and just get it working. But let's call this part 1, and I think we'll come back to part 2. So this is more of investigation and sort of what's going on. So we're creating a struct called binary op args. That's just what we call it. And we're going to derive debug because we want to look at it when we run it. Deserialize because we want to convert it back so we can still work with it with Rust, JSON schema. The calculator server, this is the struct which links with the import, which is our main thing. So the actual file is called calculator. It's just got calculator in main. I mean, you could write a MCP just all in main, but get quite long. So this is public. Calculator server is just the name that we give it. We're implementing clone, and the tool router is it's the name of the thing within our struct, and then this is where it starts getting interesting. So tool router as you can see up there, we just looked at it. So it was giving us all of that routing, all of those routing functions. You're probably thinking, if you were like me, you're probably thinking, why do I need self on the end? So let's get rid of it. This is where we get a message. So struct defined here with one generic parameter. Add missing generic argument S. I guess the S is a kind of a clue that would tell you to put self on the end, but not really. So if we exit that and try and compile it, I could compile it from there, but let's just go back to the top. So it's not happy, and as you saw, it needs the self on the end. But I just wanted to highlight that the error message, let's try that. The error message doesn't actually say self, so an incorrect number of generic arguments was provided. So if you've got struct bar x is foo, wrong number of type arguments expected 1, found 0. Personally, I find a lot of this quite confusing, especially with all the bazzers and the foos. That's meant to make it easier, but sometimes I just think, oh, I'd rather actually see some real code. No, I've gone in the wrong level. CD. Right. So if you get generic missing blah blah blah, then you need self on the end, and it's fine. What it's actually doing is it's saying that, so this here is actually obviously syntactic sugar for calculator server. Is that right? No. Is it just? Yeah. So that looks like a bit of kind of circular, doesn't it? If you were learning linked lists, you'd start thinking that should be in a box. It's not the same thing really. All you're doing here is you're just saying that the tool router can work with anything that comes from the calculator server. I've tried, so I'm not just going to bluff my way through this because I've been trying to decipher how this works because so far everything else is just very, very basic. The tool router is rmcp, which is the MCP SDK create magic ingredient. It automatically discovers and routes tool calls to your methods. So it needs to know what tools. So that's why you've got the tool router. The tool router is the proc macro. And yeah, so we'll get to this in a second. But we're going to have some tools because we're building a calculator. So you've got add, subtract, multiply, divide. That's kind of quite obvious, hopefully. So that's step 3, but let's just finish off on step 2. So we just have that self. So that's if we come back to Claude, here's the, because what I was trying to establish was when would I know to use that for sure, and it's basically try without angle brackets first. If the compiler complains about missing generics or expected end type arguments, then add self. So if you learn nothing else from this video, learn that missing generics can be solved by adding the angle brackets with a capital S self. So I told you this was more than just Yeah. That's the great thing about even with AI, AI whatever, hype, bubble, whatever, but it's still helping you learn new stuff. So that's how I look at it. When you don't need to do the angle bracket itself when you're not using generics. So when you need self when the type you're storing needs to know about or work with the containing type. The library documentation says if tool router requires a type parameter, you'll see it in the docs as tool router. So we were being asked for angle brackets S. I think if you see angle brackets S, it might be a good idea just to put in self and see if that's so yeah. Why do libraries need this? Libraries. So the whole thing is we're using a library, and that's why it's made to be generic, reusable. So yeah, again, that really in the self is the syntactic sugar for, as we already know. So generic types or Rust generics. In next, we'll look at the self tool router. And what we're doing there is using the proc macro. Now, again, you don't need to be able to write procedural macros, but if you understand what they are, then you'll know what they're trying to do for you. They're basically writing additional code. So macro expansion is actually doing additional code that you don't need to worry about. Scans your import block, finds the methods marked as tools, then it generates a tool router associated function that returns a configured tool router self. So if you don't know about associated functions, they are functions that are not attached to the, I'm slipping into Python OOP now, but instances like a class method. So if you see the double dots, that is typically something associated method. I was just asking it about self-referential method, self-referential, but then it told me I was wrong. So we'll look at that another time. So that's the GitHub for the SDK. We'll keep that open. We'll come back here. So we've done step 2. Step 3. So this is the associated method I was just talking about. And you think, well, actually, where the hell is tool router function coming from? Tool router up here, we see, but that's not a function. That's a macro. Remember if I did GD on that? It's a macro. But the macro is actually creating you the function. So as you get more into Rust, you'll start to realize that a macro can be a function, a struct can have a function, or it can have a function pointer, and you start realizing that one thing can point to something else, and then you're starting to like hop around. So things aren't always what they first look like, but you always get clues. So that tool router with the 2 parentheses, that's a function, and because you can't see that anywhere else, then logically you would probably say, well, it's tool router there, lowercase, tool router there, what's that? This is new. So after new, we're just creating obviously a new instance of the calculator server. Now for that should get created for each session. So your handler and then your Axum or Actix server will create the session, and then they will do the session stuff with an instance of calculator server. But that's part two. The next it's captured in here, but I only really want to come down to here today. The implement the server handler. You'll see that's just doing the bits, the housekeeping for MCP really. And then you'll see later on calculator server new is, we'll call that calculator, and then we capture that inside the service, which is then run with streamable HTTP service. So long story short, that gets created for each session. Okay, so now we've got our tools. To be honest, this is quite repetitive, and you're just using. We use the tool router proc macro for to decorate the calculator server. Now this is a calculator, but you probably won't want to be writing calculators. So if you're writing whatever, not rather than calculator, yours will be called something else. Server probably. I think some of the early examples in the rmcp crate were counter. I think there's some streaming or some WebSocket stuff as well. I digress. So tool, the next proc macro is tool. So you've got a tool router, which is your whole thing per session, obviously. Inside that, then you've got the tool description. The tool description is the description of the tool which you would be calling with your LLM. So this is a proc macro, but that there inside the quotes, you decide. Now what you put in there affects what the LLM reads, interprets, understands, makes decisions on. If you put add to helicopters, the LLM probably would fail when it gets asked to what is 2 plus 2. So this is really important, and you need to make it as explicit, obvious, clear, unambiguous as you can. Description will always be a description. As you can see, the next one. So it helps once you've seen the second one. So we're doing add, subtract. That's where this is a good example, because you've basically got 4 where the behavior changes, but really the structure doesn't vary too much. So there we've got the parameters. So we're doing some deconstructing later, because we've got we're also using something called zero-sized types. So this is so good because it will just expose you to lots of new stuff and stuff which is used by the good people who write libraries. So when we deconstruct that parameters, and then it's the args that we want, because later on we use the args, we add them, that's our result, and then that's our result that gets returned. And effectively, that's what the large language model will see and print back to the user. I'm going to be using Goose later on for this. Goose CLI, which is made by Block, which is funded by Jack Dorsey, who started Twitter before it all went wrong. So let's just paste in the rest of this, and it should compile. And it's not, because it's not liking parameters, is it? Did I miss that? I typed all of my code in before I started doing this video. Okay, it's just said consider importing it. So this is where you get the benefit of watching the video compared to the people who jumps ahead and just copied and pasted from my web page, from my website. Okay. Well, that looks like it will compile now. Yeah, obviously we just got that little warning. But so before we close this video, this is part one. We've looked at the imports. We've looked at importing Axum because that's going to be our server later on. We've looked at adding Tokyo because it's going to be async, as you can see here. We've looked at using we've looked at how to solve missing generics. Now, a lot of the time, if you're writing your own code, you probably write your code such that you wouldn't need it. If you're writing a library for the first time, you might have to start thinking about things like this. If you're using someone else's library, you may also get missing generics compile errors. So sometimes if you're bored, it's good practice just to take some code and then try and compile it, and without using ChatGPT or whatever, just try and actually solve the errors based on the compiler messages. I don't know about you, but I'm going to always, whenever I see this now, I'm going to think that that S is S, capital S, meaning I need to add self. I think that's probably a useful assumption. Maybe it won't always work, but so that struct is for our actual server, which will become used per session. So obviously for the struct, you have the import, and that's the import. You typically have something new without any self in the brackets, but it returns self. So a lot of this is fairly standard. You've got the proc macros, which are new. Yeah, the thing I was going to discuss was GD. So I don't know about you, but VS Code, even on bigger projects, I just find it annoying. It's great for copying and pasting in large chunks of stuff, but if you're writing code properly, you want to write it line by line, and then just the key bindings. And I know you've got the key bindings in VS Code, but just one slip of the mouse or something, or one right click and you accidentally paste in. Yeah, I don't need to convince you, but GD, go to definition, and then BD, :BD, buffer delete, I think it is. It's a lot easier than doing all the right clicking stuff. You should know if I don't need to preach to converted, but so I will get a better microphone. I'm still not making any money from this channel, so if any any wealthy Rust developers with spare cash, I did buy a microphone, but because money was short, it was a Chinese one and it's rubbish, so it's actually useless. I bought that about a year ago, so it's too late to even send it back now. Okay, so the call tool result, that's something which, where did we get that from? It comes from rmcp. It's just there we go. The result of a call operation. tool execution results. Contains the content returned by the tool execution and an optional flag indicating whether the operation resulted in an error. So it's a struct with content, structured content, is error, meta. So that's struct, and called tool result success returns content, structured content, is error, is false, no meta. If it's an error, which you also just saw, then it turns is error is true, structured content is none, and then the content. There's a nice example here actually. Create a successful tool result with structured content. So we're passing in, we're faking a structured tool result with the JSON macro there. And then the function is returning value with a call tool result. So that is showing how to return a type or an object of a call tool result. And that's showing you how to return, create an error tool result with structured content. Yes, GD. So I had to. I've been very reluctant to use Lua just because the more things you add to Vim, the slimmer the chances of getting any help on Stack Overflow used to be. So I started using Vim before ChatGPT and so on came along. So I've always tried to keep my setup very bare bones, such that I know every part of it, and I don't start using Packer or Lazy Vim and all of these assistants, which are great, but they almost give you too much stuff. I'd rather start with nothing and then add the bits that I want. So based on that, I've always used init.vim rather than init.lua. I know Jeremy Chone uses Lua quite a lot, and I've nothing against Lua. I'm aware that there was the security thing with Lua back in the summer or the autumn, but to be honest, if you gave up using things because there's been a security incident, you wouldn't use anything. I mean, MCP is a classic example. So yeah, we've built some tools that add. I'll just finish because I've kind of pasted this in. I'll just describe this one tool, and then the other three are pretty much the same. So tool description, that's a proc macro. The add two numbers is our description that the LLM will ingest and store in its head for doing any tasks which require adding two numbers. Pub async, so it's public because it's used in another file. Async because it's Tokyo. It's using ampersand self because it's it's an instance of the struct above, which is that. Calculate server with the tool router. So the result is basically args A plus args B. And the args are based on the binary op args struct. So it's one struct with two args, and then you're just kind of deconstructing those with picking them out with A and B. And then we're returning the so call tool result is that an enum? No, it's not, is it? It's I just thought it was an enum because of the double colons. It's a associated function. Anyway, it's a success variant. Content, text, result to string. It needs to be returned as a string ultimately, somehow or other, because that's what the LLM is going to want. And then we've got subtract, multiply, divide. We've got an invalid params there. Yes, a divide is always the one that needs the kind of additional error handling. Because you can multiply something by 0 and it's not an error, but if you divide by 0, then it is an error. Divide by 0 error, obviously. There we go. That's the start of the, or it's actually the calculator RS. So we've actually done the calculator. Shall I carry on and just do this all in one video, maybe? The server handler. So step 4. Sorry, I just need to check. So step 4 can go in calculator.rs. And then we'll return to main to do the Axon bits and bobs. So this server handler is actually, yeah, that's, I had that error with the parameters. If I carried on and completed it all, I would eventually have pasted that in or typed it in. So here we've used the tool descriptions. We've used the tool router proc macro. We've used the tool description proc macro. Next, we're going to use the tool handler. So if you remember, we have a router, description, and handler. Those are the three really that you just need to have in the front of your mind when you start using the rmcp official Rust SDK for MCP. Important thing to notice here is we're going to import the server handler for. So server handler is theirs, calculator server is ours. So we're not breaking the orphan rule. We need this function getInfo because this is useful for the MCP needs it. The MCP needs it because it needs to know if the protocol version is one of the allowed ones. As of January 2026, the one from November 2024, I believe, is still the most up to date. This works, so unless anybody knows differently, this is still fine. Capabilities, so the server capabilities builder, enable tools build. Just paste that in blindly. I don't know why that's just stuff. Server info, again, from build. We can do our go to definition in a minute and inspect those. And then instructions, some basic calculator add subtract. So again, that's text that we can supply. So let's paste in the tool handler. So we're still within calculator, and then we'll go to main in a moment. So remember, we've just got the two files. Main, which is where we'll add the Axon stuff, calculators, which is what we're doing now. We'll go to the bottom of this. So we've added our tools, we've added our imports, we've created our structs. Now we've got the tool handler. This macro is used to mark a function as a prompt handler. No, that's something else. Sorry. just remember tool handler macro and then import server handler for. You can pretty much copy and paste this each time, but make sure that is up to date or is current. And then you must modify this to describe what your MCP is doing. And obviously it's toString at the end. Yeah, the server capabilities. Let's just serializing, prompts, completions, logging, experimental tools, resources. Resources I'm not covering here. Completions, I really don't know what they are. Logging, experimental. Schema RS, you saw us import that. Capabilities builder. Yeah, add whatever you want or need. The resources can be useful. That's for adding files or database paths. If you're writing an MCP server that looked in a certain directory or looked at SQL database or Postgres, whatever, you could specify that as a resource. And I won't cover resources here, but wow, macros for the builder. I've not really gone into macros yet. I think there's enough to learn in Rust without getting too deep into macros. Here we've got the implementation, name, title, version, icons, website URL. Again, I'd kind of default for implementation. It is interesting, but I don't think I'm going to be obsessing over these too much in the near future. So be aware that they exist, but you can pretty much copy and paste those and just change this text. I think if I was learning MCP and Rust at the same time and had been doing Rust for maybe 1, 2, maybe even 3 years, I wouldn't want to be getting overwhelmed by all of this stuff. I would want somebody to say, paste this in, change that. Once you've got something working, you can then go back and start unpicking it and learning it, which is kind of what I'm doing now. Okay, so that is the end of calculator.rs. The tool handler macro implements the rest of the server handler tray, automatically routing tool calls to the tool router. So you got the handler, that goes to the router, tool router, and then it goes to the tool, and then it all bubbles back up again. I'll be brief on this because you've probably seen, whether you've watched Tim Clicks or you've read a Rust book, you're probably quite familiar with sockets, sessions, socket address. So here we're just going to pass. Again, this should be read from an env file really, but I'm just going to hard code 127.0.0.1. You could do localhost, whatever. Pass. And that's your socket, and you just be aware that it doesn't Rust. It doesn't infer that. You do actually need to type socket address. So if you're ready, I'm just going to copy and paste all that into main, and then we'll just do a quick overview of it, and then we'll try and compile it and run it. I hadn't planned on doing all of this tonight, but it's not. It's a bit mean just to kind of start half a video and then people watch it and invest their time in it, and then then they don't know if they're ever going to see part 2. So yeah, Axum. You don't actually see Axum anywhere here. That's why we use Axum router. We've added it in Cargo. Axum router, new Nest service. If you're familiar with Actix, you won't have seen Nest service, but it's just a thing which comes with Axum. And then you just tell it to serve it. So what have we done there? We've created the socket. We've created the calculator, which is an instance of the calculator server, which is what we've been doing for the past half an hour, making that with the tools, the proc macros and the handler and tool definitions. So service. So this is streamable HTTP service, and then the type inside is calculator server. That, I think, from memory, that's inferred. So there I had to type it. You see how that's white? But here we just said that service equals streamable HTTP service new. And then we have to pass in three things, which, again, go to the definition of this, and you can see you need to pass in the config, session manager, and the service factory. They're just things you'll need to get familiar with, really. But you're moving it in, obviously, because you don't. It needs to be within the scope. What's it called? With closures, capturing your environment, and then we take a clone of the calculator because that's cheap and easy. Session manager, local session manager, so that's storing all of the session stuff. You can see it there. Session ID, session handle, RW lock, so it's there. It's not doing the arc and the mutex and all that. It's just RW. Sorry. Again, what you're probably thinking is, what can I copy and paste each time if I want to do this, but do it from my own? So quite honestly, you can copy and paste all of this. You just need to change wherever you see the word calculator. You need to change it to whatever your code is going to be doing. And then rather than adding numbers, you could be doing, well, you could be doing numeric stuff. You could be working with reading an API or sending requests. So you could do import request, and you could be doing get post requests to an API endpoint using an MCP server. You could be connecting to somebody else's SDK. You could be doing some security, digital signatures, whatever. So yeah, you could be doing stuff with JPEGs, image manipulation, whatever you can do with your code normally, you can do inside MCP. MCP is basically a wrapper that lets the LLM, the LLM understands. So it's a wrapper around your program such that LLM can talk to your program. So without further ado, let's actually see if it runs. It should do. Didn't see any errors, did you? This is quite neat. It's it's running on HTTP, remember. So again, you remember at the start I was talking about internal or external. My article was saying how it's external, but external to Claude. So Claude is in, or ChatGPT is in wherever, America. So RMCP is external to that, but with regard to your network, it's actually internal. So don't get obsessed, don't get too confused by that. In a second, we will test this with Goose, but that's good that it's compiled. So if you haven't got Goose, I'm not going to cover it here, but that's what you type once you've installed it. I've got another MCP, which you may have seen in my earlier videos. Would you like me to help debug the, no. If you look, no, I need to edit. No, it's Goose configure. So this is a nice little GUI, TUI, whatever. Add extension. You'll notice that it still mentions SSE because there were a lot built initially before everybody started scaremongering and saying that MCP wasn't very good. What we can call our MCP, let's call it calc. This is, so you need to remember this, HTTP local host, and I've just chosen 8766. You can choose whatever port you want. No, you need to remember to put the MCP, the /MCP, because in our code, that's what we did, wasn't it? Remember? There you go. That's our effectively that's our API endpoint /MCP. Timeout, I don't know, 11 seconds. Calculator. This is the description that gets used in the YAML file. The description that is important is the description that you put in the server handler, which in this case is gone into calculator.rs. No, okay. So this is all very minimalist. So I don't want to add custom headers. You may not. Nope. So it's asked about the job MCP, which is one that I've not got running. Let's just ask it, how many MCP servers can you use? This is hooked up to Gemini, by the way. How long will it before these LLMs get their training data updated? It's not Minecraft Pro. It's not Microsoft Certified Professional. Right, use your calc to add let's do like a large floating point number. And there we see, so that oh, it's telling me off. So it was calc. So I've called my MCP calculator when I added it to Goose. I called it. This is a peculiarity of Goose. Don't worry about this too much. Happily, it's used calc, which is what I called my MCP server. In fact, let's stop this and run it with log. Stop this. We'll go back and I don't know if this will work. Don't think I added any debug code, but let's just do Goose again. I'll ask it, use calc. Hopefully it won't need to correct me this time. There we go. So rather than an LLM use its own mathematics, which is unreliable. Yeah, I haven't added any debug logging, so that was why it's not showing it there. You can also test with npx model context protocol inspector, which I've forgotten the syntax for. X? Can't remember. To be honest, if you've got Goose installed, just test it straight away with Goose. Sometimes testing with loads of browsers is actually harder than just testing straight away wired up to Goose. So all I did there was I've installed Goose and then I just did Goose configure. And how easy was that? And then you actually know that it's working on the right port and you've not got any. The other thing with the NPX protocol inspector, you could have Chrome or Firefox or browser issues. You may get proxy things. You get asked for auth. So if you're just testing locally and you want to be happy that your MCP is working, lots of settings which I haven't used or looked at, but use mode. Auto approve, smart approve. Oh, editing, creating, deleting files using extensions will require human approval. Okay, so they've put in some guardrails to stop you doing bad stuff with accidentally doing bad stuff. It's not going to stop malicious people, but it's going to protect you from yourself, which sometimes is you're your own biggest enemy, aren't you? Sometimes, so that's good. So just to wrap this up now, we've built an MCP server that runs a calculator that can be called via a large language model. Goose isn't the large language model. Goose is a command line client that calls the LLM that then calls the model context protocol server, which then calls the streamable service, which calls the endpoint, which then calls the handler, which then calls the tool. So it's quite nested. But if you're using Claude Desktop, that's the syntax. I've not tried it. I don't have Claude Desktop. I don't have a Windows machine or a expensive Mac that can only be repaired by about 3 companies in the world. So I've probably just offended about 95% of my viewership, but there we go. Adding more tools, you could add a square root. So really it's the same procedure again. The parameter args, which you destructure. The single op args, because you're not going to square root 2 numbers, so you need a new struct. You don't have the one with the A and the B, where you're adding or multiplying 2 numbers. You just need a new struct just with one. That's where you're actually doing the maths. Value dot square root. It's as simple as that. Returning structured data. Yeah, there we go. Chrono, time, blah, blah, blah. Adding state. You can read all that. There's no point in me scrolling through that. It's quite that would just make a very boring end to the video. So this has probably been quite a long video, but it's covered everything which you will need. You've got the link to the page, which is building your first MCP server in Rust, a calculator service on www.redandgreen.co.uk. You've got all the code there. I don't really even need to. I think you should copy and paste this. Very worst case is you copy and paste this in and you build it up using the 5 steps I've shown here. Once you do this, you understand the steps. Once you understand the steps, you can break down each step. Once you've understood this struct and the import for each step, then you can look at the finer points. You can look at the proc macros. Yeah, the GD thing, that's just something which I've been meaning to do for a while, and I'm pleased I did that because it's quite useful in VS Code. And I must admit, a couple of times I've opened stuff up in VS Code just because I wanted to go and look at all the definitions, which I had my init vim set up incorrectly, and I think ChatGPT was trying to tell me to switch to Lua, but I didn't want to. So then there was a bit of a standoff, and eventually I asked Claude, and Claude's maybe it was ChatGPT, but one of them said that you can just nv, what was it? Config in vim init vim. Go to the bottom. Can't find it now. It was GD, wasn't it? There it is, GD. Yeah. So in normal mode, and then I'm using the CO code on completion. I believe there's an alternative to code on. I'm not sure. It's code on completion. The alternative to Lua, or you still need COC. I can't remember. But one way or another, I just added GD. The one thing I wasn't sure how I got out of it, and I kept on doing :q, and it to come out of the definition. But when I did that, I actually quit my main.rs that I was in before I went to look at the definition. To do that, I just do :bd buffer. Is that buffer delete? I think buffer something or other. So there we go. That's how to build a basic MCP server, HTTP streamable. Now, the beauty of that is that you could run it internally in your company and you would be able to serve it to multiple users because Axum can run sessions. You'd need to think about the authorization, which is, as everybody knows, one of the challenges with MCP. Personally, I won't hear a bad word said about MCP because it's not the fault of Model Context Protocol that people are doing silly things. It's like if when electricity was invented, was it the inventor of the electricity's fault that people were putting electric cables in their mouth? The authentication, the authorization is a bit of a minefield if you are serving this to the public. But what I would argue is, and I've read recently that most MCP servers are written and used internally within your organization. If your MCP server is doing something like a calculator, you can't do much harm. If you are building an MCP server to edit your database, more for you. If you are building an MCP server to send emails, edit CSV files, do stuff, honestly, if you're using AI with Google, with Gmail, Excel, GitHub, more for you. Why even, you're trying to combine something which is capable of brilliant things, but you're trying to make it do stuff that humans were doing 30 years ago. You're mixing oil and water, really. Just understand what MCP does, understand what an LM does, understand what a vector database does, and build stuff which leverages them. Don't try and modify a Formula One car to put some tractor tires on it so you can drive down a muddy lane. Just don't. If I feel quite strongly about that, it's because millions of shit YouTube videos, millions of shit journalists, all trying to make a clickbait, engagement farming, and setting something back 1 year, 2 year, 3 years. If you've done something silly, or if you've found some company that's used an MCP server badly, that does not mean the MCP protocol needs to be thrown in the bin. Sure, it means that the authorization aspect maybe needs to be made a bit more user-friendly or a bit more ergonomic, but you could apply that to everything. So also, MCP is agnostic, and it is a tool. So all this new stuff with A2, A2, anything that begins with an A, to me is bullshit. Build the tools first. Until you've built some tools, got the tools working, made them do something useful. If you're running into problems whilst using an LLM with a tool, why on earth would you want to connect multiple LLMs that all have different tools? You're just amplifying the problems. Also, if you are using multiple agents, your costs are going to go through the roof. Your security is going to degrade. All these things will degrade exponentially because you'll go from 1 to 2 to 4 to 8 to 16. Just don't even think about it. It's foolish. Unless you've got one thing working very well, how on earth? If you've got one thing working at 70%, why do you want to then make that go exponential? As your error of 30% error goes from 1 to 2 to 4, your error is going to go exponential because errors multiply. So yeah, that's just a bit I wasn't planning on adding, but really, if you've watched the start of this video and you think an MCP server is brilliant and you go away and make it and you compile it and you use it, then that's just my disclaimer. Use it wisely and don't badmouth it. And I've got no vested interest other than I've put in time to learn this. I've put in time to make this video. I think we should all use these things responsibly and knowledgeably. So all the virtue signaling about being, responsible and uh, uh, using things to make the world a better place, yeah, it's very admirable, but that's down the line. Actually understand the nuts and bolts of what you're using first. I think this is going to be a big problem going forward because people are going to, is it top down? People are going to be seeing an MCP server as a black box, and you just think it's perfect. Nothing is perfect. Not even a Rolls Royce. You lift a bonnet, and it's going to be an oil leak one day. You cannot ever assume anything, even no matter how much money you throw at something or how many skilled people you have working on something. An Airbus A380 is still going to need an overhaul every, 10,000 flying hours or whatever. Anyway, there we go. So 5 steps: compile it, test it with MPX Model Context Protocol Inspector, or test it with Goose. Once you've got the calculator working, add a couple more functions. There's a thing about returning structured data. The LLMs now are getting much better at returning structured data. So whereas before something like Llama 3.2 would not always return good JSON, you could change the temperature and so on, and it would get better. But you'd end up having to do regular expressions and do sum or not. You'd have to do quite a lot of error handling and so on. The structured data that you get back from an LLM, particularly something like Gemini now, is much better than it was this time last year. Commutex vex string. If you watch my previous video, you'll know about that. Remember, when you're using arcmutex string, when you're moving that into your closure, and when you're using it within an impl, you use ampersand self, not ampersand mute self. Because there's two things. You've got the handle and you've got the data. Anyway, that's my previous video, which you're welcome to go back and view. Please do view. Please thumbs up. Please subscribe. And anyway, that's about it for now. It's all here. The zero size types. I don't think I did a video about zero size types. Yeah, works even without AI. I've made that up, but it's, yeah. You can Google WeWei and you'll get all sorts of Japanese metalworking companies or Chinese semiconductor companies, but in English works even. I tried to write the most code so that it works even if you don't have an LLM. This MCP is an exception because basically an MCP on its own is actually useless, really. Well, you could run it with model MCP inspector, but you might as well just use the calculator on your computer. Serde, wrappers, zero size types. This video, that's there, 2nd of January. And I've also been looking at type safe dynamic dispatch, which follows on from what we've talked about here. So this looks at function pointers, starts to look at function pointers. So that pattern, the key insight, it doesn't contain itself. So I was thinking, well, it's sort of, you know, like I said, the linked list thing where you start having to use box because otherwise you'd start getting recursion and Stack Overflow and so on. It doesn't contain itself. Remember that. The tool router calculator doesn't hold a calculator instance. It holds a list of function pointers that know how to work with a calculator. Even if you break it down, that's you've got a hash map with function pointers, type safe dynamic dispatch. Lots of cool phrases to learn that you can impress your friends with. So thanks for watching. Back soon.